Let's talk about one of the most epic conflicts in history. For nearly 30 years in the ancient world, the two biggest superpowers of Greece, Athens and Sparta, locked horns in a titanic struggle for total domination. This wasn't just a war, it was a conflict that would completely shatter their world, change how wars were fought, and, believe it or not, leave us with some heavy lessons about power that still ring true today.
So you might be wondering, how did it even get to this point? Well, after they teamed up to defeat the massive Persian Empire, these two Greek powerhouses, Athens and Sparta, found themselves staring each other down. It was almost inevitable. They were on a collision course, and each one was leading their own powerful alliance of city-states.
Okay, so on one side, you've got Athens. They're in charge of the Delian League. Think of them as this energetic, expanding democracy with a navy that is second to none. They're feeling good, and they're hungry for more power. And on the other side, you've got Sparta, the undisputed leader of the Peloponnesian League. They're a traditional, conservative society built around pretty much the most feared army in all of Greece. And they're getting really suspicious of Athens' big ambitions.
Now, the guy who wrote the history of this whole conflict, Thucydides, he had a pretty interesting take. He argued that the real cause of the war wasn't just some border dispute, no. It was Sparta's deep-seated fear of Athens' growing power. This whole dynamic, where a rising power challenges the established one, is so timeless that we actually have a name for it today. We call it the Thucydides trap.
This brings us to the first phase of the war, named after the Spartan king Archidamus. And honestly, you couldn't find two more different approaches to fighting. This part of the war wasn't defined by one big, decisive battle, but by two completely opposite and seemingly incompatible strategies. People love this analogy because it's just so perfect. You had Sparta, the elephant, with its unstoppable army just marching right into Athenian territory, burning farms and creating chaos. But then you had Athens, the whale. They'd just retreat behind their massive city walls and use their incredible navy to raid Sparta's coastline and keep their own city supplied by sea. It was a classic stalemate.
The Athenian leader, Pericles, he really thought he had the perfect plan. His grand strategy was simple. Get everyone from the countryside inside the city, protected by these huge, long walls that connected Athens to its port. Basically, he wanted to turn Athens into a giant fortified island. The idea was to just avoid Sparta's army, let the navy do all the heavy lifting, and just outlast them. He was playing the long game.
But Pericles' strategy had a fatal flaw, one he never could have predicted. You see, when you pack that many people inside city walls, well, you create the perfect breeding ground for disease. A horrifying plague swept through Athens, killing a huge chunk of the population, including Pericles himself. I mean, to give you an idea of the scale, just look at one battle, the Siege of Potidæa. The plague killed over 1,000 Athenian soldiers there. That was a quarter of their entire force at that siege, gone without a single sword being swung. So, the war just drags on for years in this bloody stalemate. Athens starts to recover a bit, and then this new plan emerges. An incredibly audacious, unbelievably risky plan, and it would become the war's most dramatic and disastrous turning point. Yeah, that was the question. Pushed by this brilliant but totally reckless politician named Alcibiades, Athens decided to roll the dice. They were going to send a massive naval force all the way to Sicily to attack the city of Syracuse, one of Sparta's most powerful allies. The thinking was, hey, if we win here, we cripple the enemy alliance and maybe, just maybe, win the whole war in one shot. And when I say they rolled the dice, I mean they bet the house. The scale of this gamble was just staggering. We're talking over 5,000 elite soldiers, more than 130 warships. This was one of the biggest forces a Greek city had ever assembled. They were putting a massive chunk of their military and their treasury on the line for this one campaign. And it turned into an absolute, unmitigated catastrophe. I mean, it was like a slow-motion train wreck. They had some early success, but then the commanders just hesitated. A Spartan general named Gylippus showed up and totally rallied the defense. Then, the Athenian fleet got trapped in the harbor and was just annihilated. The survivors tried this desperate retreat inland, but it was hopeless. They were completely destroyed. Look, this wasn't just a military loss. It was the obliteration of an entire generation of Athens' best and brightest soldiers and sailors. They were just gone. And the ones who survived, they were condemned to a slow, miserable death working in the stone quarries of Sicily. For Athens, the city's power, its prestige, its morale, it was all completely shattered.
The disaster in Sicily changed everything. It was the beginning of the end. A severely weakened, demoralized Athens was suddenly vulnerable. And Sparta, well, Sparta could smell blood in the water. They moved in to press their advantage and begin the final act of the war.
So the whole balance of power just flipped on its head. Athens was broke and had lost a generation of men. Sparta still had its incredible army, but they still didn't have a navy that could finish the job. So what did they do? They made a deal with the devil. In a stunning twist, Sparta teamed up with its old arch-enemy, Persia. And with Persian gold, Sparta could finally build a fleet that could challenge Athens at its own game on the sea. From there, the end came pretty quickly. Sparta set up a permanent fort in Athenian territory, which basically strangled Athens' access to its farms and its silver mines. Then, seeing how weak Athens was, its own allies started to revolt. And back home in the city, the stress of the war led to total political chaos, and democracy itself was actually overthrown for a while. The Athenian Empire was just crumbling from all sides. So finally, in 404 BCE, after one last crushing naval defeat, a starving Athens surrendered. Its walls were torn down, its empire was gone. But the legacy of this 27-year-long war, well, it's about so much more than just who won and who lost. You see, while Sparta won the war, it was a hollow victory. The decades of brutal fighting had exhausted every major city-state in Greece. It drained their money, it drained their manpower. And this created a massive power vacuum, which left the entire region vulnerable. It basically paved the way for a new power to rise up from the north, Macedon, led by Philip II and his son, a guy you might have heard of, Alexander the Great. But maybe the most chilling legacy of the whole war is captured in this one quote. See, before the disaster in Sicily, Athens attacked a neutral island called Milos. The Melians appealed for justice, for what was right, and the Athenians basically gave them this brutal reply. It's this stark, cold vision of pure power politics that people still study and argue about to this day. So when you boil it all down, the Peloponnesian War really serves as this timeless, sobering case study. It teaches us about the dangers of getting too ambitious, of overreaching. It shows us how fragile democracy can be when things get tough. It lays bare the brutal logic of power politics. And of course, it shows us that eternal cycle of rising powers challenging the old guard. And this leaves us with a final and pretty provocative thought. Over 2,000 years have passed, right? Yet we still live in a world of competing nations, shifting alliances, and strategic anxiety. That fundamental problem that Thucydides identified, that fear and tension between a rising power and a ruling one, well, it remains one of the most dangerous forces in our world today. Have we really learned anything?